Well, hey guys, welcome to another episode of, I guess, episode you want to say of California Haunts radio, just kind of a vlog actually. But anyway, here I am, and we have a great guest lined up for you tonight. It's kind of a change of pace from the paranormal in that it kind of hits close to home for me because my father was of the age that he was in World War II. He was in the U.S. Coast Guard and walked a bit, and he was on patrol of the beaches in North and South Carolina. And this gentleman, Steve Snyder, has written a book about his father, who was a aviator during World War II, and he was shot down. And Mr. Snyder started doing research on what happened, and he ended up getting a ton of information, enough to write a book. So we're going to bring Steve in. We are the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team at www.californiahaunts.org. We welcome you guys, and let's get Steve on. Hello.
Hi there. How you
How
doing?
are you? I'm good. I'm
I'm
really
doing
good.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really excited to have you on.
Well, I appreciate it. It's good to be on.
Fabulous. My dad wasn't. My dad also participated in World War II. He was in the U.S. Coast Guard, and most of his stuff was stateside. He was patrolling the beaches in North Carolina, and South
Okay.
Carolina, Kitty
Okay.
Hawk area, that area, and then he was on submarine patrol on the beaches.
Everyone did their job, their duty. Everyone pitched in.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I was born in Pasadena, California, raised in that area. I went to college at UCLA, graduated with an economics degree, and then I went in and had a 40-year career in sales and sales management. The last 36 was with a company called Vision Service Plan, VSP, which provides vision care as an employee benefit to cover eye exams, glasses, contact lenses. And then I retired in 2009. And that's when I had the time to really delve into my dad's war history in more detail. I knew the basics growing up. I knew he was a B-17 bomber pilot. He was stationed in England with the 8th Air Force, flew bombing missions over occupied Europe. And in 1944, February of 44, he was shot down and missing in action for 7 months, but he evaded capture and got back home. So
that is something.
And that's when I started my research and all of this. I was just a retiree, kind of taking it easy, and all of a sudden I wrote a book and had a new career.
Well, tell me about the what I know you got into doing research. Was there something that drove you to do that research, or were you just curious about knowing more about what happened?
Good question. My parents had kept a lot of material from the war years, and I just wanted to go through that and learn more. At that time, I had no intention of writing a book whatsoever. But there were two items that were really significant. One was a diary that my dad wrote while he was missing in action about his plane being shot down, which is absolutely riveting. It's in the book. And the other were all these letters that my dad wrote to my mother while he was stationed in England before he got shot down, which he kept. And one day I just sat down and went through all these letters, and I just became fascinated because my dad was really candid. And when he wrote in those letters, he talked about what bombing missions were like and over Europe, what life was like in the air base, what life was like in London and England at the time, escapades of him and his crew. And so it just became my passion. And I started doing all this research, going on the internet, spending countless hours doing research, contacting relatives of his crew members to see if they could provide me with any information. I read book after book about the air war over Europe. Joined a number of World War II organizations, went to reunions, listened to veterans tell their stories. And finally, 3 years into my research, I just came to the conclusion that the story of my dad and his crew was so unique and so compelling that it needed to be told. People needed to know about it. So I decided to write a book.
Interesting. And I was doing some. I didn't read your book yet, but I am going to. It's downloaded today for me to sit down and read because I'm fascinated with that stuff.
Thank you.
I noticed that you had started to attend reunions of the people that he had served with. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I belong to a number of organizations. Like I said, I'm past president and still a board member of the 306 Bomb Group Historical
Mm-hmm.
Association. The 8th Air Force was stationed in England, and at its peak, they had about 40 different bomb groups. And my dad was in the 306 bomb group. So that's what I'm associated with, but I'm associated with a number of other Air Force and World War II organizations as well.
That's interesting. Was it hard to do the research, or is that stuff declassified by now, or how did you go about doing that?
Well, actually, it was unbelievably easy. And I am so lucky and so fortunate and so blessed to know so much about my dad and his crew. Because, most World War II vets didn't talk about the war. And so most relatives of World War II veterans, whether it's a son or daughter or a nephew or a cousin, what have you, know very little. But, based on the firsthand testimony from my dad, from other crew members that survived, B-17 had a 10-man crew. 5 of them came back home and 5 of them didn't. And interviews and testimonies by members of the Belgium underground.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the military documents have been declassified. So bomb group diaries and mission reports, war crimes reports. And then the amazing thing is that I found the German Luftwaffe pilot that shot my dad down and
Wow,
interviewed him for the book. So I just had a wealth of information.
that's incredible. Absolutely incredible. For people that aren't aware of your dad's story, kind of fill people in. I mean, obviously they know that he was shot down, but kind of fill them in.
Okay, well, it was on February 8th of 1944 on a mission to Frankfurt, Germany, where his plane dropped the bomb successfully, but their bomb bay doors got hit by anti-aircraft fire, flak, what they called it. Flak was the abbreviation for the German word for aircraft defense cannon.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, they couldn't get the bomb bay doors back up. And then that caused a drag on the plane. They started losing airspeed, and they fell behind the formation of B-17 bombers heading back to their bases in England. And they were subsequently, kind of singled out by 2 German fighter planes who came in for the kill. And in the ensuing air battle, the Susan Ruth, my dad's plane was called the Susan Ruth. He named it after my oldest sister, who was 1 year old at the time that he went overseas. It was shot down. And 2 of the 10 crew members were killed in the plane. The other 8 crew members were successfully bailed out. And but both those German fighters were shot down. One piloted by Siegfried Merrick crashed, and he was killed in the plane. But the other one was piloted by Hans Berger, who was successfully bailed out, and he made it through the war. And he was the German pilot that got credit for my dad's plane being shot down. And I found him and interviewed him for the book. He gave me wonderful information that what it was like to go against the 8th Air Force that's in the book. And actually, Hans Berger's the only person in the shot down story who's still living. All my dad's crew, my father and his crew, all the Belgium helpers that risked their lives trying to help them are all deceased. But Hans is 97 years old now. He just had his
Wow.
97th birthday a couple of weeks ago. Lives in Munich, Germany. And fortunately for me, became a translator after the war. So he speaks
Mm-hmm.
perfect English. So I was really lucky.
Absolutely. That's what a lot of people don't realize is these World War II veterans. I hate to say are a dying breed, but they are. There's not many of them left.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
There were 16 million World War II veterans when the war ended. And today there's less than 3% of those men. And they're dying at an amazing rate because they're all in their mid to late 90s.
right.
And it's so, in 5 years or so, all those men will be gone.
Oh, I know. It's sad. It's sad, and it's great that there's people like you and myself out there that want to get these stories out because this the true stories of what actually happened, not what they're slapping together in some history book or some candied up thing.
No, like I mentioned, the book is all based on firsthand testimony. by the people who were involved in the events that took place. The only thing that I added was a lot of information and anecdotes about and surrounding the war, the 8th Air Force, the air war over Europe, to put the story in context and give it background.
Interesting. What was it like? I mean, how long did it take you to research it?
Well, from the time I started my research, the time the book was published was 4.5 years. So it was quite a while. And when I had no writing background at all or writing experience I was a salesman and sales management for 40 years, but I always kind of liked to write. And but the book's done really well, and I think that's because of the story. It's won over 25 book awards, and it has a 5-star review on Amazon. So it's been very well received. It's been very gratifying. Actually, it's changed my life. I retired in 2009. I just kind of was kicking back, doing nothing, and I decided to write a book. And after the book was published, now it started a new career. I go all over the United States, attending air shows, signing copies of the book. I do lots of speaking, making PowerPoint presentations to all sorts of organizations, trying to keep the memory alive and to educate people about the significance and the sacrifice of what took place during World War II.
Absolutely. Have you gotten the chance to fly on one of the airplanes?
Oh, yes. I've flown on a B-17 twice, and it's a thrill of a lifetime.
It is.
If those planes look big from the outside, but when you actually have the opportunity to climb inside of one, even if it's on the ground and not in the air, it's amazing how cramped they are. They were more cramped than a submarine. And what they went through in air combat and fighting off the German fighters and the anti-aircraft fire. And at the time, those guys, as I mentioned, the 10-man B-17 had a 10-man crew. They had 4 officers who were in their early 20s, and then 6 gunners who were in their teens, right out of high school.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, they're fighting a war halfway around the world, which is pretty incredible.
That is incredible. I got the chance to fly on a B-17 and B-29.
Oh, great. Fifi? Did you fly on Fifi or Doc?
Fifi.
All right. Good for you.
Absolutely. Good in fact, I got they opened up the gunner thing. I'm trying to get the words. They opened up the round,
the turret.
Turret thing in the top. Yeah, and I was able to crawl up in there and take photos looking back. It was pretty cool. Yeah, that was really cool. Really, really cool. I got to sit in the front turret as well. The one that got me was the turret, the guy that had to squeeze it into that bottom turret.
Yeah, the ball turret.
Yeah, he couldn't have been very big.
You had to be a little guy. Those combat missions lasted 6 to 10 hours. And so the ball turret gunner had to climb in there, and basically you're in a fetal position for hours on end. So it was very uncomfortable.
And then what people don't realize is those planes were not adjusted for atmosphere, nothing. There was no heat. There was nothing on them. So those guys were freezing. They had to deal with with the oxygen level, the pressure and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, because when they got to above 10,000 feet, they had to go on oxygen, or they'll pass out in a couple of minutes, die. And then, as you mentioned, it was minus 40 to 60 degrees below zero on those planes. So frostbite was a huge problem, and lots of airmen were hospitalized for lengthy periods of times with serious frostbite injuries. And one of my dad's waist gunners was in the hospital for 2 months because he got frostbite injuries on one of the missions. Yeah, it was dangerous from the time they took off to the time they landed.
If we're reading different books about the era, I understand like when they're in the air, they're not guarded all the time. It's just them, from time to time. It's just this air squadron going, the bombers, and then eventually the fighter jets, not fighter jets back then, but you know what I mean. The fighters would join them, and they just disappear after a while. That would be unnerving.
Yeah, the first mission for the 8th Air Force was on August 17th of 1942. and they really didn't have fighter support. Well, they had minor fighter support at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
but the planes at that time didn't have the fuel capacity to escort the bombers all the way deep into Germany and
Right.
escort them back. They could go across the English Channel, and then once they got into France a little bit, they'd have to turn around. But then the German Luftwaffe, the Air Force, would just wait for the escort fighters to return. Then they just swoop in for the kill. It wasn't until the beginning of 1944 when, with the introduction of the P-51 Mustang and external fuel tanks added
Right.
onto the P-47 Thunderbolts, that the
Right.
bomber
Right.
formations finally had fighter escorts that could take them deep into Germany, all the way to the target, and then bring them back home. Yeah. So
Yeah.
in the early years of the war, the the Eighth Air Force took devastating losses. In 1943, the average number of missions flown before being shot down was 6. So your life expectancy wasn't too long.
No. And how many stories did they fly in you know what I mean? Where, cause I remember watching that movie Memphis Belle, right? And they only flew
Yeah.
like what was it, 35 sorties, and they were done.
Well, at the beginning, when they first started flying, there was no mission limit.
Okay.
But then the Eighth Air Force, if the morale of these air crews was going into the tank, because they knew they'd never make it back home. They would die, be killed, or either be shot down and become prisoners of war. So in the spring of 1943, they put in a mission limit of 25. Flew
Okay.
25 missions,
25.
you could come back home. But again, in 1943, the average number of missions flown was only 6.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the fighter escorts started coming in and basically decimating the German Air Force, they raised the mission limit to 30 and then to 35.
Okay. 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 That's very interesting. To me, it's all interesting. So for your dad, when you were doing your research, and through the letters and everything, what was a typical day for him? While he was on the flight line.
Well, it varied a lot. One of the problems is that being stationed in England, the weather was usually pretty crummy. It was overcast or rainy or foggy or snow. And so there's a lot of days they couldn't fly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or they'd take off on a mission and then they had to be aborted because there was clouds over the target was too thick. So that was really demoralizing because you went through all the mental anguish of, okay, I'm going on this mission, I might die. You get in your plane, you rev up the engines, and then you take off, but then they call you back, but you don't get any credit for that mission. So you have all the mental angst that's going
Mm-hmm.
through you without completing the mission and get a credit for that mission. So that was really tough on those air crews. And then some days, all of a sudden, you'd fly like several days in a row. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it was amazing. It was so different from other uh, 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 services in the U.S. military. Is that you'd go up for a mission, have flak and anti-aircraft fire, and you're being attacked, and your buddy's dying. You come back to England, and you can get a pass going to England, like going to London, party,
Mm-hmm.
drink, and take out girls, and kind of have a normal life for like a night or two, and then back you're out, not on another mission, not knowing if you'd be killed on that mission or not. It was pretty incredible.
That's crazy. You know what astounds me too? Like you talk about those letters that he sent back home. It surprised me that the military allowed him to go into such details in those letters too, because it was their missions.
Well, my dad was the pilot, the first
Okay.
pilot, and as such, he was the commander of the crew and the plane.
Okay.
So he screened the letters of all his crewmen,
That makes sense. Okay.
but no one screened his letters. So that is pretty incredible because most people that I talk to, have letters from their dad. They just say, well, everything's fine. The weather was lousy today, and very kind of noxious and not going into detail. My dad went into extreme detail on what was going on with him and his crew members, and I said, in London. There's lots of excerpts from those letters that are in the book that make it very personal. There's also over 200 time period photographs in the book, so you can
Oh, cool.
visualize everything you're reading about.
Oh, awesome, awesome, awesome. Um, what was it like meeting the pilot that was credited with shooting him down?
Absolutely incredible. All my dad knew, or all the U.S. military knew at the time, that there was these two German fighters that attacked my dad's plane and shot him down. And that's all I thought I'd ever know. But
Mm-hmm.
during my research, one day my wife, Glenda, just casually said, "Well, why don't you try to find a German pilot that shot down your dad's plane?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, that's a stupid idea, ridiculous idea. She has no idea what she's talking about. She's so naive." But like a good husband, I did what she told me to do. And I went on Google, Google trying to find a Luftwaffe pilot, and a couple of forums came up. I joined the forums and I posted inquiries. I knew the
Mm-hmm.
day that my dad's plane was shot down, the time of day, and the location. And in a week, two guys got back to me, one from England and one from Belgium. And on that day, there were 12 B-17 shot down, and the one shot down south of Chimay, Belgium, right at the French-Belgium border, was shot down from Hans Berger. And that's when I found out that the gunners on my dad's plane actually shot Hans down at the same time. They shot each other down. So finding
Wow.
him was like a thrill of a lifetime. And, a lot of people ask me, well, don't you hate this guy that shot down your dad's plane? But just the opposite. I was so excited to find him. World War II was the defining moment in my dad's life. And at one point in history, Hans and my dad's life intersected.
Mm-hmm.
And Hans is a part of my dad's life, a part of his story. So I felt an affinity for him. And he was just a young guy at 20 years old, like most of U.S. airmen, trying to do a job, fighting for his
Right.
country, trying to stay alive. And he said it was too bad that they had to be shooting at each other, but that was war. So it's just incredible that I got to meet him and become friends and learn about his story.
That is incredible. Now, when your dad was shot down, did the Air Force let you guys know that he'd been shot down, or did you guys find out later from him?
Well, he was shot down on February 8th of 44,
Okay.
and my mother received a telegram on February 23rd
Okay.
saying his plane had been shot down. He was missing in action.
Okay.
And he was missing in action for 7 months. And my other sister, Nancy, was born while he was missing in action. So that was really tough on my mom because she had 1-year-old Susan Ruth, who the plane was named after,
Mm-hmm.
infant baby Nancy, and she didn't know if she'd ever see her husband again. And then after my dad bailed out, he came down in some trees just right at the French-Belgium border, and his parachute got hung up in the trees. He was dangling 20 feet off the ground and couldn't get down. But fortunately for him, a couple of young Belgian men, Henri Franken and Raymond Durvan, came to his rescue before the Germans got to him. This occurred early afternoon. So they helped him down from the tree. They told him to hide until nighttime because they thought it was too dangerous to try to move him with these German patrols in the area looking for these guys that bailed out. So that
Mm-hmm.
night they came and got him, took him to the Durvan farmhouse. He stayed there one night because, again, they thought it was too dangerous for him to stay there any longer than that with those German patrols in the area. So the second night, a Belgian customs officer, Paul Tilcan, came and got him on a tandem bicycle and moved him to a safer location. And then after that, he was moved from place to place to place. How long he stayed in any location depended on how brave the people were who lived there and how dangerous the Belgium underground thought it was for him to stay there. He might spend one night at a house, or might spend 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And and there were several times where he was almost discovered by the German secret police, the Gestapo. And they're described in the book. And finally, he just got tired of hiding. It was very stressful, hiding, not knowing the Gestapo get you anytime. And word came that Allies had landed at Normandy on D-Day, June 6th. He decided to get back in the fight. Unlike most airmen before he went into the Air Force, he was in the Army, the infantry for a year training. So he knew how to fight on the ground. So he decided to join the French resistance, the Maquis, they were called, which was the Maquis was made up of independent, small guerrilla groups located all over France. And their job was to harass the Germans. They would sabotage railroad lines. They would disrupt communications. They would assassinate German officers and attack German convoys. They'd get their instructions from the British through coded messages on the BBC radio, and then they were supplied by the British through airdrops. And there's a number of encounters in the book that his group, there were about 20 of them, led by a French lieutenant, had with the Germans. It was pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
And then finally, 7 months after he was shot down on September 2nd of 1944, word came that there were U.S. troops in a nearby village of Trélon, France. He walked into the town square up to an army major, identified himself. They interrogated him, and then he got a ride on a convoy that was going to Paris, and then he got a transport back to England, where he sent a telegram to my mother, 7 months later, saying, "I'm fit as a fiddle, and bank the money, honey," because he had all that back pay from being missing in action for 7 months. It's an amazing story. The book's just not about my dad, though. It's about what happened to each member of the crew and all the Belgian people that risked their lives to help them.
So talk about that a little bit. Like you say, it's not all about your dad. What happened to the rest of the crew that managed to get out?
Well, as I mentioned, B-17 had a 10-man crew. 2 died in the plane. The other 8 bailed out. 3 of them became prisoners of war. 2 of them were so severely injured that they were repatriated back to the United States before the war ended. And then the third, he stayed as a POW the entire war. And he was on the infamous Black March, 86-day march, as described in the book. And then 3 of my dad's crew members evaded capture for 2 months, but they were betrayed by Belgian collaborators, and the Nazis captured them and 5 other downed airmen that they were hiding with, interrogated them, and shot all 5.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of tragedy in the book, but there's, because of the 5 who died, but there's a lot of triumph as well for the 5 who made it. Unfortunately, my dad was one of the 5, or else I would not be here.
Yeah.
Because I was born 2 years after them.
Okay. Were you able to? I don't know if you were able to. Were you able to talk with the people or find out who hit him in Belgium or not?
Yes, my dad kept in contact with his Belgian. They were called helpers. And in, like most World War II veterans, he didn't talk a lot about the war until 1989. A memorial was erected in the little village of Mackinoise, Belgium, just north of the French border. My dad and the other 3 crew members that were still living at the time went over for the dedication, and my dad was reunited with all these Belgian people that helped him, revisited these houses and farms he was hidden in, and that brought it all back, and he started talking about it after that. And then my first trip to Belgium, I've been to Belgium 6 times.
I was going to ask you.
The first one was in 1994 with my parents. So I got to go around and see these places firsthand with my father. And I was able to meet one of his Belgian helpers, Paul Telcan's wife, Nellie Telcan, who was his only helper that was still living or healthy enough at the time to be involved in the ceremonies. So that was pretty filling. And that's when it became personal for me, because there I saw everything firsthand and could really identify it. It just wasn't stories being told, but I, saw these places firsthand where the history took place.
Right. Because see, that's one of my goals too, is I want to go to Kitty Hawk and walk the beach and and look through his eyes and see it. That's one thing that I would like to do, later on in my life, because that would be an incredible experience.
Yeah.
You say it. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, when you're there and see where these places took place, where those men were murdered,
Mm-hmm.
When my dad was hidden, where the plane came down, or I've been to Normandy and the D-Day beaches, and to see where all that took place, and the American cemeteries. I've been to 5 American cemeteries in Europe, which the crosses just go on endlessly. It's a very, very moving experience. Yeah, the people, in the United States, since we weren't, attacked or occupied, it's hard for people to understand
Mm-hmm.
what those European countries went through. And even today, the people in Belgium and the Netherlands and other occupied countries are so grateful and so thankful for the Americans and their allies coming to their rescue, because they suffered for 4 years under Nazi oppression and Nazi occupation and lost all their freedoms. Here in the U.S., especially younger generations, just take for granted that these are just, you have them and you're never going to lose them. But
Yeah.
you know, you know, as they say, and people need to realize, freedom is not free.
No, it's not. So what was your dad? I mean, did your dad have any kind of PTSD or anything like that after the war?
Well, not that I experienced. I have been told by other my aunts and uncles that he did suffer it. Coming back. Uh, my mother told me the story of one time. He had a nightmare and he was choking her. As they were sleeping in bed. He was having some nightmare. But I I don't know how long that lasted, but it didn't last. Didn't go on forever. Uh, after I was born, I never knew my dad ever suffer any PTSD, but he did when he first came back.
Interesting, interesting. So when you started talking to people about this, what was the first thing that kind of hit you, about the reality of it?
Oh, a couple things. It was just the sacrifice those guys did. Again, people have to understand that back then the United States was a completely different place. Today, most of the people live in cities. Back
Mm-hmm.
then, that lived in the country. The U.S. was a very, very rural society back then.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of these guys had never even been out of their home county,
Mm-hmm.
let alone traveled any place. There was no internet, no TV, there's no social media. The only thing they learned about the world was in a magazine or in a newspaper article. A lot of these guys, they just graduated from high school, never been away from their home, never been away from their mother. All of a sudden, they're halfway around the world fighting a war, and they could do anything they wanted to. All of a sudden, they could smoke if they wanted to. They could drink if they wanted to. They could chase women if they wanted to. It was an exciting time for these guys, without a doubt. And my dad said that. It was thrilling, because these guys being so young, like in any war, they think, well, it's not. I'm not going to be killed. It's going to be the other guy. But
Right.
they see their buddies getting killed, and that brings it, more personal. It was the sacrifice they made was incredible. That I do a lot of speaking. I don't do as much speaking as I'd like to high schools and things like that. But when I go into these classrooms and I look at these, you know, 18, 17, 19-year-old high school kids and think, you could be in a plane now going to fighting a war and never come back home.
Yeah.
But today's youth are a lot more, exposed to the world. They're a lot, for lack of a better word, worldly. They know what's going on. They're not as isolated as those guys back then. It's and that's why I do what I do, to keep the memory alive and try
Absolutely.
to educate the public.
Absolutely. Another question about your dad. Obviously, he was a pilot. Did he enlist and then go through the courses, or how did that work?
Well, as a result of the first peacetime draft in U.S. history in the
Oh.
fall of 1940, implemented by President Franklin Roosevelt, my dad, enlisted for the draft and then went into the army in April of 1941. and that's how I got into the infantry in the army. And then he got married, and he thought, well, I really can't support my new bride and my baby on the way on a private's pay in the army. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why he volunteered for the Air Force to make more money, especially if he could make it through pilot training and become an officer. So that was
Mm-hmm.
his motivation to go into the Air Force to support his family.
Okay, that makes sense. So I was wondering how that worked at that point. What do you see? I hate to say it this way, like you talk about the kids of today, they just don't realize the impact and the emotion of what it was back then, during the war. What do you see when you compare, people from then to this to now?
Well, it was just such a different time. They're referred to as the greatest generation. Like, wholeheartedly believe that. I mean, they went through the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, they were raised on hard work, and discipline and God fearing and appreciating their country, because nothing came easy back then. And
Right.
as future generations, whether it's, my generation, the baby boomers, or every generation further, it becomes a little bit easier because, your parents always want you to have a better life and
Mm-hmm.
have it easier. And, World War II ended 75 years ago. So it's fading in people's memory.
Right.
And so it's just difficult to communicate and teach younger generations, what it was like back then and the sacrifice that those people made to preserve the freedoms that we enjoy today. Because as I mentioned earlier, you know, most people just take them for granted. You can say anything you want, do whatever you want. Uh, we become more service oriented society. Hard work. It, you know, Back then, as I mentioned, it's a rural economy, and these kids, they woke up, before sunlight, before dawn, working on the farm, tilling the soil. It was just so different back then, and we become softer, and that's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if it's hard to communicate to the younger generations of what happened back then,
Mm-hmm.
and so but I try, and
Right.
it's always gratifying when I go to these different book signings that young kids are interested in World War II and want to learn about history. Um,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of history is, I don't want to get political on this, but it's trying to be rewritten today or
Right.
forgotten or changed, and I mean, if you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it. I mean, that's an expression. It's not meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
It came into being for a reason. You have to know where you
Mm-hmm.
came from. You just can't gloss over it. Even though there were bad parts and
Right.
things that maybe shouldn't have happened or bad things happened. That's a part of history, and you have to learn from
Absolutely. Now, after you did all this research on this book, you must have had piles and piles of stuff, to put together. How did you do that? Did you have help doing it, or like you say, you hadn't written a book or anything like that in your life? So, how did you do that once you compiled it?
Well, I had so much information, and I decided to use my dad's letters as a reference and just kind of do a chronological uh, timeline
Mm-hmm.
through. At the beginning of the book, I talked just a little bit about his growing up, and then getting married, and then going to the service, and then pilot training, uh, and then him and his crew going over to Europe, to England, and then flying combat missions and what it was like in England and London at the time. The first half of the book kind of builds up to the day that they were shot down, and the second and a half is all about what happened afterwards on the ground. My biggest challenge was just organizing all the material to put it in a logical sequence that would flow so the reader, could follow. And then I added just a lot of information and anecdotes about and surrounding the war, the 8th Air Force, the air war over Europe, and put it in context and give it background. And there's a ton of details in the book. 'Cause anytime I came across something, I go, well, I'm not really sure what that was. And I'm thinking, well, the readers might be interested in knowing what that means. Like my wife said, the term GI, where did GI come from? And so I explained that in the book where GI came from. And all these little weird anecdotes that they were curious to me. And I thought, well, that might be curious to the reader as well. So it's kind of two books in one. One's the story of my dad and his crew that really reads like a novel because it's so incredible, even though it's all based on firsthand testimony. And then the other part of the book is what I added. It's more of a history of what was going on at the time, what was going on during the war, and all these little anecdotes. So it was a labor of love. I loved doing it, and it's changed my life, and it started a new career for me. And although this year I'm not traveling at all because of COVID, hopefully, maybe next year that'll start up again.
Did he tell stories about it? I mean, like when you guys were, had get-togethers or around the dinner table?
Yeah, but the problem is when you're small, you're interested in, you're not, you're just playing with your toys, and that's, you really don't pay attention. Like he got together with his crew members that survived the war. They'd come over for dinner, but I didn't care. They'd call me out, Steve, come meet, Mr. and Mrs. Musial or so and so, and I just go, okay, fine, thank you. And I just wanted to get back to my room and play with my toys or watch cartoons or whatever. So you don't appreciate it, and then you get older, you're going to college, and then you start a family and you have kids and you're working. And so it's the same for everybody. Most people do that. And then all of a sudden when you finally reach a point where you go, oh gosh, that was pretty significant. I should ask. Like then most times it's too late.
Yeah, you can kick yourself for not having a recorder.
Yeah, and I meet so many people who tell me the same story. Again, I was so fortunate, so blessed to know so much and learn so much before my dad passed away. It was too bad that I wasn't able to write the book when he was still living, because that would have been pretty incredible. And also, if he could have met Hans Berger, we could have met each other. But that's life.
Yeah, it's life, but it's sad. It's just too bad. Did you find that the people you met were very open to talk to you, to give you the information that you were looking for?
Oh yeah. That wasn't a problem at all. And then by the time that I was writing the book, all the military documents have been declassified, like bomb group diaries and mission reports and war crimes reports. So I had all that information too to kind of fill in blanks in the book. And I couldn't have done it without the internet. Years ago, it would have been impossible.
That would have been crazy trying to find that. I agree.
Yeah, you just couldn't have done it. You just couldn't have done it.
I agree. Did he ever do any after the war? Did he ever do any flying at all?
No. When he got back to England after he met up with the U.S. armies in France, he was sent back home to the States to become a B-17 instructor. The Air Force had a rule at the time that if you were shot down over occupied territory and held by the underground, that you couldn't fly combat again, because they were worried if you were shot down a second time, captured by the Germans and tortured, that you'd give up the identity of the people that helped you. So he was sent back to the States and became a flight instructor, a B-17 flight instructor in Florida and Ohio for war until the war ended.
Oh, cool.
But he didn't fly again, and so I wasn't exposed to aviation at all growing up. I'm not a pilot. I get asked all the time if I'm a pilot because I'm around these air shows all the time.
Right. What did he do for a living?
Oh, he did a lot of stuff. after he was an air traffic controller for a little while after he was a B-17 flight instructor, and then I don't know what inspired him to do this, but he bought a restaurant in Pasadena, and he ran that for 10 years. It was called Snyder's. And he became the chef, because the most chefs were so unreliable. He decided he was going to become the chef. So my dad was a great cook, and he did that for 10 years, and then it was just too hard for him, standing on his feet all day, serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then he went into a bunch of different sales things that most of them didn't go anywhere. And then finally he got into redemption stamp business. Probably most people watching your podcast don't even know what that is. But back in the 60s and early 70s, they had redemption stamps. So if you went to the grocery store, a gas station, you get these redemption stamps depending on how much you bought, and then you'd paste them in a book, and then you could redeem the books for merchandise, whether it's a washer and dryer or a vacuum cleaner. And so he got involved with a Acra stamp machine company that made the dispensers. It dialed like a telephone, the stamps would out. And that's what he retired from.
Interesting. Very interesting. When you go out to lecture and talk, or even to these air shows, what's the most frequent question you get from people?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, one is about the Luftwaffe pilot. How I could be friends with him. The other probably is what my dad did after the war. If he flew more combat missions. Fairly basic. It's interesting because some of the presentations there's no questions. Other presentations there's like a multitude of questions. It all depends on the audience. But I enjoyed doing it.
Oh, great! Absolutely. So where did you get like I know you obviously you had to go to the military to get the to get some of that information that was declassified. How did you get the photos? Was that through the military as well?
Well, some of the photos, but an amazing number of the photos were taken.
Whoop! He froze up. Bummer. Well, that's unfortunate. I don't know if it's my end or his end, but Steve has frozen up on me, so we gotta freeze. Let's see if he comes back online in a second here. Anyway, this has been a great interview with Steve. I'm fascinated by the topic, and I'm so glad he came on. We've been trying to coordinate this for like a month. And I have to make a quick correction because in the beginning of this, I said he was an aviator. He was, his father was an aviator. His father was not an aviator. His father was a pilot in the Army Air Force. So I'm going to make that correction right now while I have a second. And okay, and we lost Steve. He'll probably come back in. So, but I just want to let everybody know we'll be back next week with another great show. Back to paranormal topic. I'm going to try and vary these things. Maybe every other week, do a spotlight on somebody that's done great things. So hopefully that's how it's going to work. But in the meantime, like I said, we might go to 2 shows a week. I'm tired. Sorry. We might go to 2 shows a week, and do it that way. So it depends on how it all flows. But I'm enjoying doing these. I don't know if you're enjoying listening, but I'm enjoying doing these. I love doing this. I like talking different topics. Paranormal is wonderful, and I've been doing it for a long time. But I also like having different topics with people, especially people like Steve. Let me see if I can text him. I'm gonna see. Got my phone for my dialing. Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and text him. We lost him. At least this time, I mean, on my end, my internet held up tonight for once, so I'm real happy about that. But again, you can check us out at www.californiahaunts.org. And like I said, I want to get my Saturday or Sunday show going again because we do have a lot of case files, and I do want to tell stories from those cases. Because we do have a lot of interesting ghost hunt stories to tell. If I don't hear from Steve, we're just going to go ahead and close this thing off early tonight. Let's see what he says. He just texted back. He says it's his end. It's okay. See, it's cool. I'm a patient hostess. But anyway, we just did a fascinating case in a house in excuse me, give me a second. We just did a fascinating case in a house in Carmichael, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit this weekend, and hopefully I can get to that. And we're gonna have, like I said, we're gonna kind of change it up with the guests and everything. So be looking for that. And again, we're going to be changing studios as well. We're going to be in the smaller studio probably starting mid-November. We're going to be switching out of this studio because I have some video stuff that I need to shoot in this particular studio, so I have to shift everything out. Otherwise, because all the radio stuff's in here and all that. So I'm really going to be, I keep saying looking forward, but I am. There's a lot I'm looking forward to. There's a lot to look forward to with California Haunts. I've started my blog up again. If you want to check that out, check Facebook. I'll go ahead and repost it tonight. I'm doing part one. Part 1 of 2 is on there. I talk about kind of like with what Bishop Long and I were talking about different groups going into houses and how a lot of the groups that are going out are inexperienced. And I talk about that, and I give groups tips, people tips for how to tighten up their ship as far as their teams go. Just tips. I'm not telling people how to run their teams. I'm just doing tips, and I think it's going to be very helpful and informative. And for the people that don't do ghost hunting, I think it'll be informative for them too. So be on the lookout for that. That got released last night, by the way. But I'll go ahead and re-release the first part, and I'll probably start working on the second part tonight and get that out. But it's been great. This has been a great experience. And tonight's been a great experience. Like I said, everything worked. My internet worked. The California Haunts team is 35 strong. We're located up and down the state of California, Nevada, Washington, and parts of Hawaii, which is kind of cool. It's really kind of cool. Aloha. And we can go anywhere in the state of California to help people, because that's what we do. We don't charge for our services, but we do help people. If you like this show, feel free to share it with other people you know. If you didn't like the show, share it anyway with people you hate. Why not? Revenge is sweet. And as you can see by the ticker at the bottom, help us bring more exciting guests on here. You can tell I'm just really tired of that. More exciting guests on here, and we're just looking for donations to keep this show going. It's kind of like PBS when they do their shows. That's what I'm doing. I'm asking for donations to do this show. And the more donations I get, the better equipment I can get, the better I can improve my internet and get you guys better and better guests and stuff. Okay, so go ahead and do that and help us out a little bit. I hate begging. But again, we're the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California, and I'm looking forward to doing other shows with you guys. I really am. And for you guys, and Steve's back. So we're back, sports fans. Hey, how you doing?
Sorry about that. Did you get my message about where I am?
Yeah, I did. That's cool. That's cool.
Kind of fits into your normal show.
Yes, it does. It does fit into my normal show. I've had weird things happen even doing this show. I mean, the past couple of weeks, I've had some real deep, what I call deep paranormal guests on, and I've had nothing but audio issues. So I don't know if it's just my internet or if it's just the guests. You know what I mean?
Oh.
I have on, or some power that be doesn't want the audio working. I don't know. So we got about 5 minutes left. Tell us where we can get this book, and what you have coming up.
Okay. Well, most people get the book on Amazon. Okay. But it's available almost anywhere, Barnes and Noble. If anyone wants a signed hardback copy, they can go to my website, which is stevesnyderauthor.com. That's Snyder, SNYDER, stevesnyderauthor.com. And if my website has a wealth of information. It's just not about my book. If anyone wants to learn more about the Air War over Europe, the 8th Air Force, there's veterans interviews, archival footage, TV shows that about the Air War 12 o'clock high. There's a ton of information on my website.
Awesome,
And
awesome.
yeah, it's I spent a lot of time putting that together. I did make a documentary short about my book. I've entered into a number of film festivals, and so that's kind of the latest thing that I was working on now because of COVID and not being able to travel or go anywhere. I've done quite a few interviews, either podcasts or radio
Mm-hmm.
interviews. So that's what I'm doing now.
Cool, cool, cool,
So
cool.
these are fun. You've
They
done
are
a
fun.
fantastic job, by the way. You're a great interviewer. You ask
Thank you.
wonderful questions.
Thank you.
You really
Thank you so
engage
much.
your guest.
It's good to hear. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the title of your book for people that don't know it.
Okay. It's called Shot Down: The True Story of Pilot Howard Snyder and the Crew of the B-17 Susan Ruth.
You know what? You're a great guest. You have all the answers, and I like that. That was really cool. I had a ball, and it was very fascinating. In fact, you make me want to. I can't wait till the museums and stuff open up because I want to get back over the air museums because I love looking at all the planes and and going through them and stuff. So that's something. My dad was a plane nut. So we would go down to the airport every Sunday, and then hang out and look at all the airplanes, and he would talk about them and stuff. And then he'd have all these books on the B-17s, the B-29s, and all this. So my dad I learned all about them. So I mean, this was tremendous for me to have you on.
What airport did you go to?
Sacramento International over here.
Okay. Yeah, because
Before it was Sacramento International.
the company I worked for, Vision Service Plan, is based in Rancho Cordova.
There you go.
So I got up to Sacramento a lot. In fact, I was just up there a couple weekends ago because my youngest son Clayton got married in Granite Bay.
Awesome. Well, it was really fun too because my dad had after he got out of the war, he had worked for Boeing. So it was kind of cool because that's how he knew about the airplanes, so much about the airplanes and stuff. So talking with you has been absolutely fabulous tonight, and I was really excited to have you on. I'm glad you came on, and I would love to have you on again and on a later date because I mean this was a blast.
That's great. Usually every year, which would have been a couple of weekends ago, I always come up to Sacramento to Mather Air Force Base for the California
There you go. Air Museum.
Capitol Air Show.
Yeah, I love it.
I usually go up there to sign copies of that. That's a great air show, the California Capitol.
That is a great air show. I love it. Just absolutely love it. I try to.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm sorry my internet went out for a little bit.
That's okay. I don't have the best internet either sometimes, so that's what I mean. That's why I was wondering if it was my end or what, because like I said, I've been having trouble the last couple of times I do the show. So this was great, and I appreciate it. Like I said, I would like to have you on in the future. Maybe when you come into Sacramento or something, we could go live. That would be kind of
cool. Yeah,
we could do a live show. So anyway, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And you have a good rest of the week, sir.
Okay, you take care and stay safe.
All right, you too. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, well, that was what I felt like a great show. I learned a lot. I learned a lot more than I knew from before. I did a lot of reading up on the particular topic of the bombers over World War II and whatnot in World War II. God, my lips don't want to work right today. But anyway, I will see you guys hopefully on Saturday, assuming we don't get a case coming in, or possibly Sunday. Assuming something doesn't come in and take up my time. But I hope to see you guys so we can do some more research from the California Haunts case files. Okay, so I'll talk to you later. If not, we will see you next Wednesday with another great guest. See you later.